Some say a mile is not a long distance, a short drive, a pleasant walk, but the mile of frozen water that separated the Vance estate from the town of Northwood might as well have been an ocean. On one side stood the house of Alistair Vance. It wasn't a house, really, it was a statement. Walls of glass stared out at the lake like cold, unblinking eyes. It was a fortress of wealth, built to keep the world out and to keep one person in. His daughter, Clara. Alistair was a man forged in the fires of the stock market. He saw life in terms of assets and liabilities, profits and losses. He loved his daughter, of course. To him, she was his most prized possession, but he loved her the way a collector loves a rare painting, something to be protected, admired, and kept under perfect conditions, away from the dust of the common world. He believed his money was a shield that could protect her from all of life's hardships. He didn't understand that sometimes a shield can become a cage. On the other side of that frozen mile lived Leo. Leo's world wasn't made of glass and steel. It was built from cracked plaster and the faint scent of herbal remedies. He lived with his mother in a small, drafty house that groaned when the winter winds blew. His father was gone, a memory faded by time and hardship. His mother was sick, a persistent cough echoing the fragility of their lives. Leo, at just 17, carried the weight of a grown man on his shoulders. Every morning before school he'd chop wood, his breath pluming in the frigid air. Every afternoon he'd work odd jobs in town, his earnings a desperate dam against a rising tide of medical bills and overdue notices. He didn't see life in terms of profit and loss. He saw it in moments. A rare smile from his mother, the warmth of the wood stove, a brief, quiet minute looking out over the frozen lake. He saw the Vance mansion across the water. To him it wasn't a fortress, it was a star, something distant, beautiful, and belonging to another sky. He never felt envy. He just felt the distance. He and Alistair Vance were two kings of two different kingdoms, separated by a mile of ice that was about to test the very nature of their worlds. Vance taught his daughter that their wealth made them different, that it made them better. He told her the people in the town were not like them. They had different struggles, different ambitions. It was his way of protecting her, of defining her world. He gave her everything money could buy, but he never gave her the one thing she truly craved, the freedom to be ordinary. Leo's mother taught him something different. She taught him that kindness was a currency that never lost its value. She taught him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the act of doing what was right, even when you were terrified. As winter tightened its grip, freezing the lake solid, these two worlds and the lessons they taught were set on a collision course. Vance believed his fortune made him powerful. Leo believed his character was his strength. Neither man knew that the ice was listening, and it was about to decide which one of them was truly rich. But before the ice could deliver its verdict, a single, fleeting moment would connect these two separate worlds in a way no one could have predicted. The town of Northwood survived on the crumbs from the Vance estate's table. The wealthy residents of the lakefront homes ordered their groceries from the town's only store, had their lawns manicured by its men, and their homes cleaned by its women. It was a relationship of quiet, unspoken dependency. Leo, in his quest for work, took a job delivering groceries. It was grueling work, pedaling his old bicycle with a heavy basket through the snow-dusted roads. One afternoon, his route took him to the gates of the Vance estate for the first time. The gates were tall and black, wrought iron shaped into intricate, merciless spikes. It felt like the entrance to another realm. He was met by a stone-faced security guard who checked his list and pointed him toward the service entrance, a small hidden door at the back of the monolithic house. As he was leaving, he saw her. Clara was in the garden, a sprawling, perfectly manicured landscape that was now sleeping under a blanket of white. She was wrapped in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Leo's house, but she didn't look grand. She looked small, lonely. Her eyes, the color of a summer sky, were fixed on the frozen expanse of the lake. For a moment, she wasn't a millionaire's daughter. She was just a girl, staring at the horizon. Their eyes met across the pristine lawn. It was only for a second. Leo, startled, offered a small, hesitant nod. It was the only thing he could think to do. To his surprise, a flicker of a smile touched Clara's lips before it vanished, as if she was afraid someone might see it. It was a secret shared, a tiny spark of warmth in the freezing air, and then the moment was broken. Alistair Vance appeared on the patio. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His presence was a command. He put a hand on Clara's shoulder, his posture rigid, and guided her back inside. But not before casting a look at Leo. It was a look of pure, undiluted dismissal. A look that said, "You do not belong here. You are not seen. You are nothing." Leo felt a flush of heat on his cold cheeks. He wasn't ashamed of his worn coat or his rusty bike. He was stung by the injustice of it. The man hadn't seen a boy. He had seen a threat, a piece of the dirty common world that had gotten too close to his treasure. As Leo pedaled away, the image of that look was burned into his mind. That night, Vance lectured Clara. "I don't want you interacting with those people," he said, his voice calm but cold as steel. "They are not our kind. They want what we have. You have to be careful." Clara didn't argue. She just retreated further into her silence, the memory of Leo's simple, honest nod, a stark contrast to her father's cold paranoia. The brief connection was severed. The walls were reinforced. Vance was confident he had neutralized the threat, but he had done something else entirely. He had planted a seed. In Clara's mind, a seed of curiosity about the world beyond her father's walls. In Leo's mind, a seed of understanding about the true nature of the man in the glass fortress. He wasn't just wealthy. He was poor in a way Leo could never be. And as the temperatures continued to plummet, that single shared glance would become the silent prologue to a day of terror and reckoning. The cold deepened. It wasn't just a season anymore, it was an entity. It crept into the bones of Northwood, seeping through the cracks in Leo's home. The air grew so still and sharp that a snapped twig echoed like a gunshot across the landscape. And then the lake began to transform. It started at the edges, a thin, crystalline skin forming overnight. Day by day it grew thicker, spreading inward, capturing the deep, dark water in its icy fist. Soon the entire mile-wide expanse was a solid sheet of polished, imperfect glass. It glittered under the pale winter sun, a thing of breathtaking, dangerous beauty. The people of Northwood knew the lake's moods. They knew its treachery. They taught their children to respect the ice, to read its colors, the deep, safe blue versus the treacherous, milky white. They knew it was a bridge, but a bridge that could betray you at any moment. For Alistair Vance, the frozen lake was a stage prop. It was the perfect dramatic backdrop for his perfect home. He would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of expensive scotch in hand, and admire the view. He saw power in it, the untamed wild, frozen solid, subservient to his gaze. He saw it as an extension of his own domain, a private, sterile landscape for his enjoyment. He never once considered its danger, not in a real way. Dangers, to him, were things that could be mitigated with contracts and security systems. The raw, impartial danger of nature was a concept as foreign to him as poverty. He saw the beauty, but he was blind to the beast that slept just beneath it. For Leo, the frozen lake was a constant reminder. It was a clock ticking down the days of winter. A thicker freeze meant colder nights, which meant burning more of their precious firewood. It meant the winds that swept across its surface were more brutal, more biting. He saw the beauty, too. In the early morning, when the sun caught the ice just right, it looked like a field of diamonds. But he also saw the dark shapes moving beneath the surface, the memory of the living water, and he felt a profound respect for its power. It was a respect born of necessity, of understanding that in a fight with nature you never truly win. You can only endure. And for Clara, locked in her silent, opulent world, the frozen lake was something else entirely. It was a promise, a possibility. It was a smooth, open road leading away from the suffocating perfection of her life. She watched children from the town, tiny figures in the distance, skating and sliding near the shore. She heard their laughter carried on the wind, a sound so foreign and joyful it made her heart ache. Her father saw a beautiful painting. Leo saw a powerful adversary. But Clara saw a path to freedom. It was a beautiful, tempting, and utterly deceptive illusion. She didn't know that the very thing she saw as an escape was about to become her prison, and the ice didn't care if you were rich or poor. Alistair Vance loved his daughter, but he didn't know her. He knew the version of her he had created. Clara Vance, heiress to a fortune, a delicate flower to be shielded from the world. He mistook her silence for contentment. He mistook her obedience for happiness. He was a master of the grand gesture, the material solution to any emotional problem. Did she seem sad? He would buy her a pony. Did she seem lonely? He would redecorate her room. He communicated his love through transactions, because that was the only language he was truly fluent in. He couldn't see the deep well of loneliness inside her, the yearning for a simple, genuine connection that had no price tag. One afternoon, he found Clara staring out at the lake again, her face pressed against the cold glass. He saw her watching the distant figures of the town children playing on the ice. He misinterpreted her longing. He saw it not as a desire for community, but as a desire for the activity itself. That evening, a package arrived. Inside was a pair of the finest ice skates money could buy. They were beautiful, with blades of polished Swedish steel and boots of soft, white Italian leather. "There," he said, presenting them to her with a proud smile. "Now you can skate. Right here in our private section of the shore. I'll have the staff clear a perfect rink for you tomorrow." Clara looked at the skates. They were exquisite. They were also a perfect symbol of her life, a beautiful gift that completely missed the point. She didn't want to skate alone on a private rink, supervised by staff. She wanted to feel the bumpy, imperfect ice with friends. She wanted to fall and have someone laugh with her as they helped her up. She wanted to be a part of the noisy, joyful chaos she could only see from a distance. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The gratitude was genuine, but it was layered with a profound sense of resignation. How could she explain what she wanted when he was incapable of understanding it? How do you describe the warmth of the sun to someone who has only ever lived in a cave? Vance took her quietness as overwhelming gratitude. He patted her on the head, satisfied. Problem solved. He had provided the best. He had done his duty as a father. He was blind, utterly, tragically blind. He couldn't see that in giving her the skates. He had also given her a tool, a key. He thought he was providing a controlled, safe activity. He had no idea he was providing the means for a rebellion. He went back to his office, to his world of numbers and spreadsheets, confident that his daughter was happy, safe, and provided for. He had built a fortress of wealth around her, and he believed it was impenetrable. He failed to understand the most basic truth of human nature, that the most desperate prisoners are not those who rattle the bars, but those who quietly watch for the one moment the guard turns his back. The day was brilliantly, deceptively sunny. The sky was a vast, cloudless blue, and the light reflecting off the snow and ice was almost blinding. Alistair Vance was consumed by a conference call, his voice a low, aggressive growl, as he negotiated a deal worth millions. He was in his element, a general commanding his financial armies. He had forgotten all about the skates, about his daughter's quiet gaze, about the world outside his window. It was the moment Clara had been waiting for. The guard had turned his back. With her heart pounding in her chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and excitement, she pulled on the new skates. She left a note on her bed. "Just went to try the skates, be back soon." A small, futile gesture to soften the disobedience. Then she slipped out the back door. The private rink the staff had cleared was perfect. The ice was smooth as glass, but it wasn't what she wanted. Her eyes were drawn to the center of the lake. It looked vast and free, a wild, untamed plain of ice. This was the freedom she craved. Taking a deep breath, she stepped off the manicured rink and onto the lake itself. The ice felt different here. It was alive. It groaned and creaked under her blades, speaking a language she didn't understand, but she was fearless, emboldened by her small act of defiance. She skated further and further out, away from the shore, away from the oppressive shadow of her home. She was laughing, a real uninhibited laugh, the wind whipping at her hair. She felt free. At the same time, Leo was making his way along the edge of the woods that bordered the lake, pulling a small sled. He was gathering fallen branches, his mind on the dropping temperature and his mother's cough. He could see the solitary figure on the ice. He recognized the red coat. It was the girl from the garden. He paused, watching her. He felt a pang of something. Worry. She was too far out. Way too far. The center of the lake was always the last part to freeze solid, the most unpredictable. He could see the color of the ice change from a safe, deep blue to a pale, milky white. It was a warning sign every child in Northwood learned to read before they could even write their own name. And then it happened. It wasn't a loud noise. It was a sharp, sickening crack, a sound like a bone breaking. One moment, Clara was a graceful figure, gliding across a sea of diamonds. The next, she was gone. The ice had simply swallowed her. A dark, jagged hole was all that remained, and a single terrified scream that the wind snatched and carried across the frozen silence. Leo's blood ran cold. The sled, the firewood, his mother, everything vanished from his mind. There was only the scream, the hole, and the horrifying, absolute stillness that followed. In that heart-stopping second, there was no rich girl or poor boy. There was only a life in peril and the terrible choice to run away or run towards the danger. For a fraction of a second, Leo was paralyzed, not by fear, but by the sheer shock of what he had seen. The world seemed to stop. The wind died. The sun felt cold. The girl had vanished into the black, icy water. Then his paralysis broke, shattered by a surge of adrenaline so powerful it felt like an electric shock. There was no thought. There was no calculation of risk. His mother's lessons, his own ingrained character took over his body. He didn't think, "That's the millionaire's daughter." He thought, "Someone is dying." He dropped the rope to his sled, and he ran. His worn boots slipped and skidded on the treacherous surface. He was running toward the very danger every instinct screamed at him to flee. The memory of the father's cold, dismissive look flashed in his mind, but it didn't matter. The man's arrogance had no place here. The ice was the great equalizer. It didn't care about bank accounts or social status. As he got closer, he could see the dark water churning. He could see the edges of the broken ice, thin and fragile. He dropped to his stomach, distributing his weight, crawling the last few feet like they taught you in town. He could hear a faint splashing, a desperate, weakening gasp for air. He reached the edge of the hole. Clara was there, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost silent. Her fingers, already blue with cold, were clawing uselessly at the slick, sharp edges of the ice, which broke away in her grasp. The water was pulling her down, her heavy winter coat acting like an anchor. She saw him, and for a moment a flicker of recognition, of hope, crossed her face. "Help! Me!" she choked out, her voice a fragile whisper swallowed by the cold. Leo knew he had only seconds. He couldn't reach her from here. Trying to pull her out would just break more ice and pull him in with her. There was only one way. It was an insane choice, a suicidal choice, but it was the only choice that offered any chance at all. He took off his thin jacket, throwing it to the side. He took a final deep breath of the freezing air, and without a moment of hesitation he slid into the water. The shock was absolute. It was not just cold, it was a physical blow, a violent, crushing force that stole his breath and squeezed his heart in a vice. The darkness of the water was absolute. For a terrifying second he was disoriented, the cold burning his skin, his muscles instantly seizing up. But then he saw her, a pale shape sinking just below him. He kicked, fighting against the instant lethargy, the sweet, deadly temptation to just stop. He grabbed a handful of her coat, his own body screaming in protest. He had made his leap of faith. Now, trapped in the freezing darkness beneath the ice, the real battle for survival had just begun. The water was a living entity of pain. Every nerve in Leo's body was on fire, 1,000 tiny needles of ice piercing his skin. The cold was a predator, already working its way to his core, slowing his thoughts, thickening his blood. But the sight of Clara, her eyes fluttering closed, her body going limp, ignited a primal ferocity within him. He would not let her die. He wrapped one arm around her chest, pulling her head above the surface. "Stay with me," he yelled, his voice raw, the words barely forming in his frozen mouth. "You have to fight." He kicked his legs, trying to propel them toward the edge of the hole, but it was like moving through wet cement. His waterlogged clothes were impossibly heavy. Clara was a dead weight in his arms. His own strength was fading with terrifying speed. He could feel the life being leached out of him, second by second. His vision started to tunnel, the brilliant blue sky shrinking to a tiny pinhole. He knew this was how it ended. You fight, you get tired, and the cold wins. But then he thought of his mother, her frail smile, the way she depended on him. He couldn't leave her alone. That thought, that one single thought, was a spark in the encroaching darkness. It was enough. With a guttural roar of effort that ripped from his very soul, he lunged upward, hooking one elbow over the edge of the ice. It held. He gasped, sucking in a ragged breath of air that felt like swallowing fire. He held Clara with one arm, his other arm straining, the muscles screaming as he tried to pull them both out. But he couldn't. He didn't have the strength. He was failing. "Help!" he screamed, the word a desperate, cracking plea to the empty, silent landscape. Somebody help! There was no answer but the mocking whisper of the wind. He knew then that there would be no help. It was up to him. He changed his strategy. He couldn't pull them out, but maybe he could push. He positioned Clara in front of him, shoving her torso up onto the solid surface of the ice. "Climb!" he sputtered, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Use your arms! Pull!" His command seemed to pierce through her semi-conscious state. Her hands feebly slapped at the ice. It was a pathetic attempt, but it was an attempt. Leo used the last ounce of his strength, a final desperate surge born of sheer will, and pushed her from below. Her body slid, inch by agonizing inch, out of the black water and onto the white ice. She was out. She was safe. And as she rolled onto the surface, the last of Leo's energy vanished. His grip on the ice failed. He slipped back, his head going under the water one last time. Darkness closed in. He had saved her, but in doing so, he had sealed his own fate beneath the frozen lake. Inside his glass fortress, Alistair Vance finished his call. The deal was closed. A multi-million-dollar victory. He felt the familiar rush of triumph, the intoxicating sense of power. He poured himself another drink to celebrate, a rare smile on his face. It was only then that he noticed the silence. The house was too quiet. A prickle of unease, an unfamiliar sensation, went down his spine. He called for Clara. No answer. He walked to her room. It was empty. Then he saw the note on her bed, and the unease blossomed into full-blown panic. He ran to the window, his eyes scanning the private rink he had so carefully prepared. It was empty. His gaze swept further out, across the vast, empty expanse of the lake. And then he saw it. A splash of red against the blinding white. A small figure, lying motionless on the ice, and next to it a dark, menacing hole. The blood drained from his face. The glass fell from his hand, shattering on the marble floor, but he didn't hear it. A primal scream of terror and denial tore from his throat as he sprinted out of the house, not even bothering to grab a coat. He ran, his expensive shoes slipping, his heart hammering against his ribs with a force that threatened to break them. The mile of ice he had admired for its beauty was now a landscape of pure horror. As he got closer, his terror intensified. Clara was lying there, soaked and shivering, but next to her was a boy, the delivery boy, the smudge on his perfect landscape. In that moment, Vance's mind, shattered by fear, couldn't process the truth. It defaulted to its ingrained programming, suspicion and blame. He saw the poor boy next to his daughter, and his first terrible thought was not of rescue, but of accusation. "What did you do?" he roared as he reached them, his voice raw with panic and fury. He didn't even see Leo's condition, the blue lips, the violent shivering, the semi-conscious state. He saw a perpetrator. He shoved Leo aside, a rough, dismissive push that sent the boy sprawling back onto the ice. "Get away from her!" Vance gathered Clara into his arms, his entire world shrinking to his daughter's pale, cold face. "Clara, baby, can you hear me? Daddy's here." He barely gave Leo a second glance. The boy who had just dived into freezing water to save his daughter's life was now just an obstacle, an annoyance. Some staff from the house, alerted by the commotion, came running with blankets. They wrapped up Clara. Vance screamed at them to call an ambulance. He was a whirlwind of frantic, terrified energy, completely focused on his child. Leo lay on the ice, forgotten. He tried to push himself up, but his limbs wouldn't obey. The world was a blurry, spinning mess. He heard Vance's words echoing in his mind. What did you do? And the injustice of it was a pain colder than the ice he lay on. He had saved her life, and his reward was to be treated like a criminal. As they rushed Clara to the hospital, leaving Leo to be helped by the staff as an afterthought, Alistair Vance believed the nightmare was almost over. He had no idea it was just beginning. The hospital was a blur of sterile white walls and the antiseptic smell of fear. Alistair Vance paced the waiting room like a caged tiger, his mind a chaotic storm of anger and terror. He had his daughter back, but she was being worked on by a team of doctors, her life still hanging in the balance. He barked into his phone, making calls, demanding the best specialists, threatening lawsuits. He was trying to solve this problem the only way he knew how, with money and intimidation. He refused to think about the boy. In his mind, the boy was tangled up in this disaster, a symbol of the common world that had encroached upon and harmed his own. He was a loose end to be dealt with later. Finally, a doctor emerged. "Mr. Vance," she said, her face grim. "Clara is stable. She's suffering from severe hypothermia, but we believe she'll make a full recovery. You got her here just in time." A wave of relief so immense it almost brought Vance to his knees washed over him. He had won. His daughter was safe. "But you need to understand something," the doctor continued, her voice firm. "Your daughter was in the water for several minutes. The only reason she's alive is because someone pulled her out, and that someone is in the room next door, fighting for his own life." Vance stared at her, confused. "The boy who was with her," the doctor clarified. "He went in after her. He dove into that freezing water. He kept her head above the surface and pushed her onto the ice before he went under himself. Mr. Vance, he didn't just find her. He saved her. He traded his own body heat for hers. It was the most heroic thing I have ever seen." The doctor's words hit Alistair Vance with the force of a physical blow. They didn't compute. They crashed against the fortress of prejudice he had built in his mind. The delivery boy, the nobody, a hero. It wasn't possible. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the boy he had shoved aside with the hero the doctor was describing. Later, when Clara was awake, her first words were a weak, chattering whisper. "The boy, Leo, is he okay?" she asked, her eyes pleading with her father. "He saved me, Daddy. The ice broke. I was drowning, and he came for me. He jumped in. For me." That was the moment the fortress crumbled. His own daughter's words. The simple, unadorned truth. The boy he had dismissed, the boy he had looked at with contempt, the boy he had accused, had willingly dived into a frozen grave to save the life of a girl he didn't even know. And he, Alistair Vance, with all his money and power, had stood on the shore, useless. His wealth couldn't stop the ice from breaking. His influence couldn't pull his daughter from the water. In the moment that mattered most, he was powerless. A poor boy in a thin coat had been more of a man than he had ever been. A profound, crushing shame, cold and heavy as the lake water itself, settled over him. He saw his reflection in the hospital window, and for the first time he saw himself for what he truly was, a blind, arrogant fool. The truth had hit him, but the hardest part was yet to come, facing the boy he had wronged and the world he had so utterly misjudged. 2 days later, Leo was discharged from the hospital. He was weak, exhausted, but alive. He and his mother went home to their small, drafty house, the world seemingly unchanged. The medical bills from his stay were a new mountain of worry on top of the old one. For Leo, the rescue was already a strange, dreamlike memory. The part that felt most real was the memory of Alistair Vance's face, the anger, the accusation. That look was a deeper wound than the cold had left. That evening there was a knock on their door. When Leo's mother opened it, Alistair Vance was standing on their doorstep. He wasn't wearing a tailored suit, but a simple dark coat. He looked older, smaller, stripped of his usual armor of arrogance. He held an old hat in his hands, twisting the brim. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Alistair Vance," he said, his voice quiet, uncertain. "May I please speak with your son?" Leo came to the door. He saw Vance and his posture stiffened, a wall of defense going up. Vance looked at the boy, at the quiet strength in his eyes, the simple dignity in his posture, and he finally saw him. Not a smudge, not a threat. He saw the hero who had saved his world. "Leo," Vance began, and his voice cracked with an emotion Leo had never expected to hear from him. Humility. There are no words. To say thank you. It feels cheap. It's not enough. He took a deep breath. "What I said to you on the ice, and how I looked at you before, it was monstrous. There is no excuse. I was blinded by fear and by a prejudice I didn't even realize I had. I was wrong, and I am so sorry." The apology hung in the air of the small, warm room. It was raw, genuine, and deeply felt. Leo saw the shame in the man's eyes, the profound regret, and in that moment, Leo's own resentment melted away. He simply nodded. Later, Vance would insist on taking care of everything. He paid off all their medical bills, past and future. He set up a trust for Leo's education, ensuring he could go to any college he wanted. He bought them a new, warm, comfortable house in a better part of town. He did everything money could do, but everyone knew that wasn't the real payment. The real payment was the change in the man himself. Alistair Vance had been reborn in the cold water of that lake. He started seeing the people of Northwood, not as his employees or as a threat, but as his neighbors. He started a community foundation. He spent time with his daughter, not just buying her things, but listening to her, really listening. He learned that his daughter didn't need a shield. She needed a father. The frozen lake that had once been a barrier between two worlds became a bridge. It had taken a poor boy's selfless courage to teach a rich man the meaning of wealth. Alistair Vance learned the hardest lesson of his life on that frozen day, that true value isn't measured by what you own, but by what you are willing to give, and that courage, kindness, and love are treasures that no amount of money can ever buy. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons every week.